The room was still warm from the board meeting when Greg leaned over my desk with that synthetic smile he saves for interns and HR photo shoots. "You won't need to prep for tomorrow's client sync," he said, tapping a coffee ring onto my notes. "Lacey will be leading from now on. My daughter's ready." He said it like we were passing down Grandma's casserole recipe, not a $250 million contract. I didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't feed his need for a scene. Just reached into my drawer, pulled out the company-issued iPhone and handed it to him. "Everything's in there," I said. He nodded like he'd won something. "Now, for anyone wondering how we got to the steaming pile of executive incompetence, let me rewind for a second. Just long enough for you to grab your coffee, hit that like button, and maybe even subscribe if you're one of the 90% ghost listening without it. It seriously helps the team and means I get to keep spilling corporate tea in peace." Okay, where were we? Right, the slow train to nepotism hell. I've been the account lead on Westbridge for 6 years. That's 6 years of flying coach to last-minute summits, replying to 2 a.m. just curious emails from Robert Fielding, their CEO, and hand-holding his junior team through everything from supply chain hiccups to that time their DevOps guy took down the staging server during an earnings call. I did it all, without complaint, and more importantly, without mistakes. Westbridge wasn't just a client, it was my client, my baby. My badge of honor in a company where women like me, 42, child-free and tired of being called detail-oriented like it's a disease, don't exactly get paraded at shareholder meetings. Greg Halpert, however, has a different compass. He likes noise, flash, legacy, the kind of guy who uses phrases like succession planning while unwrapping his tuna melt. And lately, he's been parading his daughter Lacey around the office like she's a Silicon Valley prodigy, instead of someone who once asked me what business to business meant. 2 months out of LinkedIn sales boot camp, and suddenly she's shadowing calls and sniffing around my client decks. I started noticing things. The copier mysteriously out of toner every time I needed to print a contract. My name left off a meeting invite I created. Lacey popping into client Slack threads she had no clearance for, then gaslighting me when I asked why. "Oh, I thought we were collaborating now," she chirped, tapping her color-coded planner like it held the secrets of the universe. Greg just laughed it off. "She's eager, Mags. Teach her your magic." My magic? That would be 2 decades of professionalism, a Rolodex of favors, and an ability to disarm egos twice my pay grade. You don't teach that. You earn it. You bleed for it. But Greg didn't care. To him, I was the scaffolding. Invisible, crucial, and disposable once the new bricks were in place. The last straw wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was Tuesday at 5:46 p.m. I was closing up for the day when an intern named Jalen wandered by and said, "Hey, Lacey's updating the Westbridge portal, said you were off it." I stared at him, said nothing. Just nodded like I knew. Like I'd signed off on the handoff of the most sensitive portfolio in the firm. I checked my inbox. No notice. No transition doc. Just a forwarded memo from Lacey titled Next Chapter. The email opened with "excited to collaborate" and ended with the typo in Robert's name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I poured myself a lukewarm cup of breakroom coffee, watched it swirl in the chipped mug, and told myself what I always do. Don't give them your anger. Give them your silence. It terrifies them more. By the time Greg dropped the final hammer Thursday afternoon, "We're doing this for long-term alignment," I was already gone in every way that matters. My dignity had been packed the moment Lacey changed my calendar permissions without asking. All I had left was clarity. So, I smiled, handed over the phone, and walked out. Not out of the building, no. Just out of the story they thought they were writing. They didn't know about the NDA. They didn't know about Clause 3A. They didn't know what Robert Fielding would do when he realized his trust had been transferred without consent. But I did. Greg always liked to call these fireside chats, even though the only fire in that conference room was the one burning through my career. The man loved a metaphor. So when he cleared his throat at the Thursday strategy sync and tapped his Montblanc pen against the table like we were at some country club powwow, I already knew something rotten was coming. "We're making a slight adjustment to the Westbridge account," he said with a grin that smelled like betrayal and breath mints. "In the spirit of succession planning and continuity, Lacey will be stepping into the client lead role effective immediately." It landed like a wet sock on polished wood. No one clapped. No one asked a follow-up because everyone knew what Greg meant. His daughter gets the golden goose. The rest of us get breadcrumbs and polite nods. Lacey beamed across the table like she just won an Oscar for most oblivious Nepo baby in a supporting role. I didn't blink. I didn't give him the pleasure. Instead, I pulled open my laptop bag, retrieved the company phone, black case, Westbridge notes organized in color-coded apps, text threads with timestamps dating back years, and placed it gently in front of her. "Everything you need is in there," I said. Greg smiled like he just solved middle management. "Thanks, Mags. Knew you'd be a team player." Team player. That's what they call you when they've already erased your name from the playbook. I watched as Lacey fumbled unlocking the phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the screen like it was a foreign object. Probably because the last client she handled was a group project in business school, where she got credit for choosing the font. Greg leaned back in his chair, like some Roman senator handing out provinces to his progeny. "We believe in evolving talent," he said, "and Lacey's proven she's ready for this level of exposure." Yeah, exposure, like an open wound. The meeting moved on. Discussion points about quarterly projections, vendor escalations, a brief chuckle from marketing when someone mispronounced a pharma client's name, but I wasn't in that room anymore. I was watching from underwater. Words muffled, movements slow. Betrayal has a way of numbing your body before it hits your brain. I nodded when appropriate. Added a note about the vendor rebate program because God forbid I stop being competent. But my hands had already started packing. Not my desk, my trust. I knew Greg's game. He always liked his pawns quiet, polished, and grateful. And I'd stopped being grateful the moment he started referring to Lacey as a sponge for leadership. The girl could barely handle a calendar invite. But sure, let's give her our largest client and hope she doesn't forward sensitive data to her Pilates instructor by mistake. After the meeting, I walked past Lacey's new client lead desk and noticed she'd already swapped the Westbridge folder into her name. It had emojis in the title. Emojis for $250 million contract. I didn't say a word, just kept walking. I spent the rest of the day backing up nothing, deleting nothing, editing nothing. I wanted it all there. Every exchange, every negotiation, every late-night crisis that Robert Fielding and I had navigated without dragging the firm into it. Lacey was inheriting a loaded weapon, and I had no interest in disarming it. By 6 p.m., the office was emptying out. People smiled at me like nothing had happened. A few offered awkward change as growth comments in the elevator, like I'd just been gently nudged into retirement instead of being gutted at my desk. I nodded, thanked them, and said nothing. There's a special kind of silence you master when your dignity is being quietly murdered by a man who once forgot your name at a holiday party. I sat alone at my desk until the lights flickered into energy-saving mode. My inbox was already filling with meeting requests Lacey had forwarded, half of them in the wrong time zones. She'd invited Robert to something called Westy Check-in Light Sparkles. I almost laughed, almost. Instead, I pulled up the NDA on my personal laptop. Not the company one, the personal one. The one Robert and I signed 3 years ago in a side room at the Westbridge Summit in Chicago after a failed vendor leak nearly tanked his merger ambitions. It was clear, explicit. One line burned into my memory like a scar. No third-party correspondence without prior written consent. Breach of Clause 3, a shall void engagement. And there she was, inviting Robert to a meeting like they were besties at brunch. Let them have their little coronation. I'd already set the funeral date. Friday morning started like any other. Cheap coffee, fluorescent lights, and Greg's voice echoing from his corner office like a drunk goose trying to recite a TED Talk. But under the hump of printers and passive-aggressive Slack threads, something had shifted. Not in the air, in me. I didn't log into Westbridge's portal, didn't check their Slack. I was still on the access list, but what was the point? Greg had declared a royal succession, and I'd been handed a crown made of expired printer toner and passive dismissal. So, I just waited. Didn't warn Lacey, didn't flag the NDA, didn't prep a transition doc or guide her through the landmines I'd been tap dancing over for 6 years. Let her step right into the war zone with nothing but a ring light presentation. At 10:12 a.m., the first shot was fired, a ping in the shared client inbox. I read it once, then again, then had to close my eyes just to process the sheer absurdity of it. Subject line, big vibes ahead. Rocket excited to partner. The body was worse. Hey, Robert, just wanted to reach out and say I'm thrilled to be your new point person. I've been following your brand journey for years, and I'm obsessed with your leadership style, smiling face with hard eyes. Let's grab time next week to sync. Maybe a virtual matcha chat? Matcha chat with the CEO of a publicly traded company who once fired a VP over an exclamation mark in an investor memo. I didn't reply. Forward. Didn't screen cap it to legal with a snarky subject line like I wanted to. I just sat back in my chair and stared out the window like I was watching a train slowly and beautifully derail. At lunch, Greg held court in the executive kitchen like the second coming of Steve Jobs. He called it a new chapter and said things like the torch has officially been passed while sipping LaCroix like it was Dom Perignon. Lacey sat next to him nodding, giggling at nothing, tossing her hair like someone in a commercial for shampoo and poor judgment. She's already connected with Robert, Greg said proudly. Didn't even need prompting, natural leadership instincts. I think I chewed through the plastic of my fork. They didn't ask me to speak. Didn't even look in my direction. I wasn't the future anymore, just the relic still clocking billable hours while the company skated into a glass wall. Back at my desk, I opened the NDA again. I didn't need to, but sometimes you need to feel the words again to make sure they haven't changed while your world has. Section 3A. All communications between Robert Fielding and Margaret J. Kessler shall remain exclusively between signatories. Breach by any party not named in this agreement constitutes immediate contract nullification. There was no footnote, no gray area, no corporate override clause. Wasn't between Westbridge and my company. It was between Robert Fielding and me. He didn't sign it because he trusted my firm. He signed it because he trusted me. And now Lacey with her matcha invites and emoji subject lines had bulldozed through it like a toddler with a crayon in a museum. I closed the laptop. Didn't save anything. Didn't call legal. I didn't even open Slack the rest of the afternoon. I knew what was coming. The dominoes had been lined up for months. It was just a matter of who would breathe wrong first. The irony was I never wanted this. I wasn't looking for vengeance. I didn't stay up nights fantasizing about takedowns or public shaming. I liked my job. I liked being good at it. But when someone sets fire to your name, sometimes the best thing you can do is hand them the matches and walk away. Let them burn it all down, then send them the insurance clause they forgot to read. At 4:03 p.m., a new calendar invite popped into my inbox. Subject: Emergency call Westbridge time, Friday 9 a.m. Required attendees: Greg Halbert, Legal K. Bishop, Lacey Halbert, Margaret Kessler. I just smiled, still on the guest list, still holding the last word, and if they thought silence meant surrender, they'd forgotten who taught them to listen. Email came in at 6:17 a.m. while I was still nursing burnt coffee and watching my cat try to murder a sock. The subject line was blank. Just one sentence in the body. I saw the update. Are you still under NDA? No salutation, no fluff. Just Robert Fielding, CEO of Westbridge, world-class detector, and a man who once fired a PR firm mid-campaign because they used a stock photo of people clinking wine glasses. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling my pulse settle into something sharp and slow. Then I typed exactly 9 words. Until one of us terminates. Yes, still active. Hit send. Close the laptop. Watch the sock murder resume. By 7:30 a.m. I was dressed in my usual Friday uniform, charcoal blazer, loose blouse, subtle earrings that said I can dismantle you politely, and sipping coffee number 2 when the meeting alert dropped. Subject: Emergency call Westbridge time 9 a.m. sharp. Attendees: Greg Halbert, Lacey Halbert, Legal K. Bishop, Margaret Kessler. Location: Conference Room 3B plus Zoom link. The kind of invite come with emojis. The kind that makes executives sweat through their starch. I heard Greg's voice in the hallway not long after, loud. Forced laugh loud. She's settling in great. He was telling someone, probably from ops. Already talking roadmap strategy with Fielding. Natural instinct for the relationship game. I almost choked on my toast. Meanwhile, Lacey breezed past my office door in one of those power blazers from Instagram boutiques that come with hashtags like #bossvibes and #manifestit. She was humming. She didn't knock, didn't pause, just waltzed into the war zone with all the grace of a possum in a bakery. And I didn't move, didn't warn her, didn't ask if she'd double-checked the contract language or run anything by legal. I just finished my toast and added a note to my notebook. 9 a.m. reckoning. Around 8:20, I took the long way to the 3rd-floor conference room. Past familiar desks, nodded at the front desk receptionist who'd once helped me reprint a Westbridge MSA at 7 p.m. on a Sunday. Walked past the break room fridge I'd cried in after my first Westbridge renewal. Because it was my win and no one had noticed. And now they'd notice. Conference room 3B was already half full when I walked in. Legal counsel looked bleary-eyed. Greg was pacing like a man trying to remember if he packed a parachute. Lacey was perched at the table like it was a brunch date and not the front row of her professional evisceration. Good, Greg muttered when he saw me. Let's keep it collaborative, yeah? I sat down, unbuttoned my blazer, smiled politely, said nothing. The Zoom screen flickered to life at 8:59. Robert Fielding's square appeared dead center. No assistant, no team, just him in what looked like a quiet office with morning sun cutting across the glass behind him. Calm, crisp, dangerous. He didn't waste time. "Greg," he said, nodding once. "Margaret, Robert, hi." Greg jumped in, smile way too bright. "Hope you got Lacey's email. She's thrilled too." Robert raised a hand. Room froze. "I'm here because that email constitutes a direct violation of a standing non-disclosure agreement I have with Margaret Kessler," he said. "Specifically, Clause 3A, you authorized someone to contact me regarding a confidential roadmap initiative. That contact was not one of the two named parties. That in legal terms is a breach." Lacey blinked. Greg shifted. Legal started quietly opening a binder, and I just folded my hands in my lap and said the only thing that needed saying. "I'm still under NDA," I told the room, "and I never transferred authorization." The silence that followed was beautiful. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. Full of executives suddenly realizing that the house they thought was built on succession and synergy was actually made of dry twigs and hubris, and someone had lit a match. And the match wasn't me. It was their arrogance, their assumption, their blindness to the one line in a contract that up until this moment they'd treated like a footnote. The next move wasn't mine, it was Robert's. And judging by the way he leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on Greg's suddenly pale face, that move was coming fast. The call didn't so much start as it detonated. One moment the speakerphone was crackling with the usual pre-call static, legal mumbling, Greg clearing his throat like he was about to charm the devil. The next, Robert Fielding's voice cut through the air like a guillotine. "Greg, your daughter contacted me. That violates the personal NDA we had in place. Clause 3A was explicit. No third-party contact without written consent. No hello, no preamble, just a full-speed collision with the truth." I watched the room react like a slow-motion car crash. Legal counsel Kathleen Bishop froze mid-page turn, blinking as though her glasses had failed her. A second lawyer, Parker, started flipping through a thick blue binder like his hands were on fire. Lacey stared at the speakerphone like it had just called her out by name at a school assembly. And Greg, dear delusional Greg, turned the color of an undercooked pork chop. "Robert," Greg said, his voice trying to sound calm but cracking on the vowels, "I assumed the NDA was with the company. Margaret signed as an employee, right?" There was a long pause. "No," Robert replied, crisp and cold. "Wasn't. She signed as an individual, so did I. It was a personal agreement executed outside of your standard service contracts because the matter it covers wasn't just corporate, it was confidential." Greg looked at Kathleen. She didn't meet his gaze. Just kept flipping, flipping, flipping. Like she could somehow turn fast enough to outrun Clause 3A. I thought," Greg started again, grasping at straws. "We assumed that Margaret's role, her position, and that any agreement like that was by default under company umbrella." Robert let out a short, breathy sound, almost a laugh, but not quite. "Greg," he said, "you should never assume anything when the first clause includes the word personal. That's what your legal team missed. That's what you missed. And that's why this is happening." Lacey looked at her father then, finally catching the scent of blood in the water. "Wait, so you're saying I broke a contract?" "You didn't just break it," Robert said. "You nullified it." That landed hard. I could feel it reverberate off the glass walls. Even the hallway outside seemed quieter, like the office itself was holding its breath. Kathleen finally stopped flipping and closed the binder one slow, deliberate motion. She didn't look up. "Clause 3A, she said, voice barely audible. "Clear as day. No third-party contact unless mutually amended in writing. No amendments on record." Greg sat down like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. This is a misunderstanding." "No, Greg," Robert said. "This is a breach, and I have no intention of debating it." Silence. Long, awkward, knife-in-the-gut silence. Then Robert continued, tone flat and final. "Per the agreement, Westbridge is withdrawing the contract effective immediately. Your internal breach of the NDA voids our engagement under Section 7.2. Any confidential data shared during that engagement is now off-limits for reuse or internal presentation. That includes projections, product development materials, and any roadmap conversations prior to this transition." Lacey whispered, "What's Section 7.2? No one answered her. I didn't move, didn't blink. just sat and watched as the ship I'd steered for 6 years took on water. Fast and loud and full of holes Greg himself had drilled in the hull while grinning. He tried again, this time more desperate. Robert, this isn't a proportional response. We're willing to fix this. Reassign oversight. You can? You had oversight. Robert interrupted. You chose nepotism over process. And now you've compromised a pending merger that your firm wasn't even supposed to know existed yet. That's not something you fix, that's something you suffer. Speakerphone went silent. Then Robert added, almost as an afterthought, Margaret, thank you for the clarification earlier this morning. That line you sent, still active, helped confirm what I needed to do. And then he hung up, just like that. No goodbye, no room for Greg to spin it or Lacey to offer a chirpy LOL, my bad. It was done. I glanced across the table. Greg was staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Lacey looked confused, like someone had just explained taxes in Mandarin. Legal leaned back in their chairs and no one spoke. I could have said something then, could have driven the knife deeper, but I didn't. Let them sit in it. Let the weight of their assumptions press down until something cracked, because the real damage hadn't even started. The sound of Robert hanging up wasn't dramatic, just a soft click, but the silence it left behind roared. You could hear the HVAC hum, could hear Kathleen's pen tap once against her legal pad, and then stop like even that sound felt inappropriate. Greg sat motionless at the head of the table, eyes darting from face to face like a man suddenly unsure of who in the room worked for him and who was already planning his exit slide. His voice broke the silence, dry and cracked. Is that enforceable? He didn't look at legal. He pleaded with them. Kathleen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Parker looked down at his shoes. No one answered. The absence of a response was the answer. That's when Greg stood half out of reflex, half out of panic. Come on, he muttered to no one in particular. We've spent years building this. This can't just disappear over a technicality. But that's exactly what it had done. It hadn't imploded. It had been nullified, neatly, surgically. A $250 million engagement vaporized in a single sentence and one bulletproof clause. Clause 3A that Greg never bothered to read because it didn't come with a champagne toast or a LinkedIn announcement. Panic began to crackle, quiet and sharp. Leadership whispered in pairs at the far end of the table, finance murmuring to legal, ops eyeing marketing. I could feel the whole room recalibrating their alliances in real time, the mental shuffle, who gets blamed, who survives, who leaks this to the board first. I didn't move, didn't gloat, just sat in my chair like a ghost who'd already left the building. Greg finally noticed me. His voice turned sharp, almost hopeful, like I was a lifeline instead of the last honest person in the room. Margaret, he said, surely we can. You've been on this project for years. Is there a way to patch this? Maybe if you reach out to Robert, clarify things. I tilted my head, slow and steady, like I was trying to remember the word for audacity in another language. You already clarified things, Greg, I said softly. You reassigned the account, unilaterally, publicly, repeatedly. His mouth opened, but no words came out. You voided the NDA, not me. Still nothing. And for the record, I added, Robert doesn't do take-backs. That last line hit. He knew it was true. We all did. Robert Fielding was the kind of man who'd delete your number for a misplaced bullet point. This was treason. Greg slumped back into his seat, as if gravity had suddenly remembered he wasn't needed. Somewhere down the hallway, a phone rang and kept ringing. In another life, it might have been Westbridge. Now, probably just facilities asking why half the executive team looked like they'd seen God, and she had a kill switch. Kathleen finally closed her binder. Parker muttered something about needing to review compliance protocols, which we all knew meant panic quietly behind closed doors. Still no sign of Lacey. Never made it to the meeting. Last I checked, she was in the marketing wing trying to figure out how to forward with inbox, except she hadn't figured out that the inbox had already been locked. It froze at the moment Robert terminated the engagement. Just protocol. And the irony? Her email was still set to out of office with a gift of a dancing cactus that said, slaying my new role. The timing almost made me laugh. Almost. Greg rubbed his temples. This is going to be a lot to clean up. Kathleen didn't respond. No one did. There was nothing to clean. This wasn't spilled coffee. This was a detonation. Across the table, someone from finance finally whispered, What's the exposure on the merger materials? That did it. The whisper became a low buzz as the reality began to settle in. Not just the loss of the contract, but the potential leak of road-mapped IP tied to the Westbridge deal. Material that, per the NDA, is never supposed to leave my hands. Material that Lacey had already previewed in a deck Greg submitted to the board. Material that now technically belonged to no one. The kind of exposure that gets people investigated, or worse, audited. I sat quietly folding my hands in my lap. I wasn't there to twist the knife. I was just watching them discover where it landed. Saturday morning, 9:14 a.m., the sun was spilling through my kitchen blinds. Dust floating in the beams, like little suspended secrets. I had just taken the first bite of my cinnamon toast when the email came in. Westbridge Legal. Subject line, confidential. NDA appendix follow-up. I clicked it open. Hi, Margaret. Per the language in Appendix C of the Fielding and Kessler NDA, we are initiating protective measures regarding the road map assets discussed under that provision. Mr. Fielding has requested your input regarding potential containment protocols and recommendations. We are also seeking your recollection on any attached term materials that may intersect with Section 4.1 billions. Please advise availability. Simple, surgical. No panic in the text, but then again, Westbridge didn't write panic into their communications. They'd been to this rodeo before. This was just the part where they lassoed the fire and turned it into paperwork. I grabbed the folder from the cabinet, the one with the embossed tabs, the real notes, the printed version of the NDA that wasn't gathering dust on some shared drive with 5 admins snooping through the margins. Clause 3A had done the damage, but Appendix C, that was the minefield. Flipping it open, I felt that old muscle memory kick in. The dates, the bullet points, subclauses I'd helped massage into cleaner language over late dinners and off-the-record calls. Appendix C wasn't just a legal tag-along. It was the vault. It contained reference to a confidential term sheet between Westbridge and an unnamed biotech firm. And now the word was written clearly in Robert's own hand from the scan version. Oravalis, the biotech firm, still in pre-IPO phase. The strategic partnership had circulated last quarter, but nothing had gone public. This merger wasn't just speculative, it was radioactive. Even acknowledging its existence without clearance could trigger a regulatory response. Robert had looped me in months ago, under a firewall of NDAs with NDAs because my role involved interfacing with Westbridge's data science integrations. I was a firewall, and Greg had just burned it down. By allowing Lacey to take over the account without so much as a briefing or a security review, he hadn't just cost us the $250 million. He potentially leaked language, models, and materials that, if even hinted at in earnings previews or investor decks, could trigger a full audit of both companies. I pulled out the Oravalis notes, handwritten, dated, my initials in the corner. I remembered that call. Robert was pacing through a terminal somewhere in Zurich, explaining how delicate this acquisition could be and how our company had become a trust filter because of our discretion. His exact words were, "If this leaks, we don't just lose the deal. We make headlines the wrong kind." Now here we were on the edge of a headline, and I knew what Greg had done. I remembered that ridiculous internal pitch deck he'd presented to the board last quarter, boasting about a new vertical pivot into precision health, a phrase he didn't even understand. He had been using the roadmap slides. My slides never meant to leave my drive, let alone appear in a pitch without the legal watermark. I took a breath. No rage, no shaking hands, just cold, clean focus. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about precision. I spent the next 3 hours building a packet, not a rant, not an exposé, just facts, timelines, and supporting documentation. I labeled each section clearly. Dates of NDA execution, specific mentions of the roadmap references, and every material Greg or Lacey had touched since the reassignment. I included email threads, version histories, access logs. I made it idiot-proof because I knew idiots would be reading it soon. By late afternoon, I had it ready. 56 pages. Bound. Time-stamped. I didn't send it yet. I printed 2 copies and stored them in separate locations. One stayed with me. One went into a safety deposit box I'd been meaning to close, but suddenly felt quite fond of. I closed the binder, smoothed the cover, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a faint, precise click inside my brain like a safe door locking. Let the storm come. I was already dry. Monday morning came with the smell of burnt coffee and too much cologne. Greg always wore the kind that tried to announce power through notes of desperation and pine. I could smell it wafting down the corridor before I even stepped off the elevator. The calendar event was officially titled Internal Account Audit Westbridge Transition Debrief, but we all knew what it really was, the firing squad in a conference room. I wasn't supposed to be there. My name wasn't on the invite. I'd been transitioned off Westbridge the previous Thursday with all the fanfare of a cardboard box and a LinkedIn reshuffle. But at 8:20 a.m., I got a message from the lead compliance officer, Naomi Leckler. One line, you may want to sit in, room 5 degrees Celsius 9. So I went. Not because I wanted to watch a train wreck. I'd already memorized the wreckage, but because when you build something from scratch and someone sets it on fire, sometimes you show up to catalog the ashes. The room was already tense when I arrived. Greg was hunched over the table, jaw tight, sleeves rolled like he thought he was about to do real work. Lacey sat beside him, arms folded, her iPad open to a Pinterest board titled Leahy Arship. Naomi stood at the end of the table, fingers steepled over a manila folder that looked heavier than it should have. Thanks for joining, she said to no one in particular, and she opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Held it up between her thumb and forefinger like a piece of evidence at a murder trial. This is the NDA between Margaret Kessler and Robert Fielding of Westbridge, signed and notarized. It includes an appendix covering confidential merger documentation and forward-looking strategic roadmap content. Can someone explain why this was not reviewed before the reassignment of account ownership? Greg opened his mouth, then immediately closed it. Lacey, however, did not disappoint. Why would we review her contracts? She said like she was swatting a mosquito. She was staff. We were just shifting account roles. It's not like she owns Westbridge. Naomi didn't react. She just turned her head toward me, and that's when I finally spoke. Because it was tied to the product roadmap, I said, my voice low but clear. Your earnings call last week included 3 slides with unreleased content. Content that wasn't scheduled for internal distribution until 4th quarter. Naomi blinked once. That was all. Greg shifted in his seat like the cushion had suddenly turned to lava. I continued, not angry, not emotional, just stating facts like a grocery list. That content, slide 7 in particular, mentions real-time blood protein tracking via third-party precision partners. That phrase comes directly from a document listed in Appendix C of the NDA. A document that was never cleared for internal distribution, let alone public mention. Lacey looked confused, like someone had just asked her to do algebra in front of a crowd. But I didn't write the slides, she said, hands up like she'd just been handed a DUI. Dad helped me prep them, and marketing cleaned them up. Naomi raised a single eyebrow. So, multiple departments worked on slides using unreleased, contract-bound content without verifying its clearance. Greg interjected, voice rising like a man trying to out-yell the ocean. This is absurd. We've never had issues like this. Margaret worked on that account for years. She knew what could and couldn't be shared. Why would she leave something so sensitive behind if it was that restricted? I turned to him then, looked him right in the eyes. 'Cause you took the phone out of my hand mid-meeting, I said. Because you told me Lacey was taking over effective immediately. Because you didn't ask for a transition doc, you asked for obedience. Naomi set the NDA down on the table like a guillotine blade. Whether or not there was intent, she said, there's now exposure, and that exposure touches unreleased merger data, material IP, and client-bound strategic data. I'm flagging this to legal and regulatory. Greg's face fell. Lacey turned to him, panic finally cracking her lip-glossed composure. Wait, what merger data? He didn't answer. He couldn't because he didn't know. Because the man who demoted me in a room full of grins and weak coffee never once asked what was under the hood of the contract he handed to his daughter like a party favor. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and said nothing more. My work was done. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The boardroom at 3 p.m. was colder than usual. Not in temperature. Someone had probably cranked the thermostat in a panic earlier, but in presence. You could feel it in the way no one looked at each other too long, in how every throat clear sounded like a confession. The Westbridge fallout had detonated through the building like a seismic charge, and this was the aftershock. The moment when names are read, consequences assigned, and legacies quietly strangled. At the head of the table, General Counsel Madeline Sharp adjusted her glasses, flipped to the tabbed page, and read in a voice smooth enough to bruise. Disclosure of roadmap material prior to partner sign-off shall be deemed anticipatory breach. No interpretation, no footnote. Just the line, clear, final, and now weaponized. Greg's jaw clenched so hard it looked like he was trying to chew through time itself. Lacey didn't speak. Her phone sat face down on the table, buzzing once then again. Probably HR or worse, PR. A soft rustle broke the silence. The CFO, Richard Lane, leaned in slightly, voice low but clear enough for the room to hear. That's insider trading risk. The words hit the table like ice water because it wasn't just a broken contract anymore. It was disclosure. Forward-looking statements. Content that had been wrapped in NDAs, firewalls, and legal insulation, suddenly paraded on a slide deck with bold fonts and color-coded bullet points. If anyone outside the room had made trades off that information, we weren't looking at breach, we were looking at a federal investigation. Madeline closed the binder. The board didn't debate. There was no shouting, no denial, no last-ditch speech from Greg, just a silent vote. Hands raised around the table, measured, decisive. Kind of vote that happens when the wreckage is undeniable and the cost of pretending is too high. Greg was placed on immediate leave. Lacey was formally stripped of client-facing roles pending internal review. They didn't even use the word termination, not yet, but the silence afterward carried its own kind of obituary. No one looked at them. Greg stared straight ahead, breathing through his nose like a man trying not to cry on camera. Lacey glanced at me once, eyes wide and wet, but I gave her nothing. Not cruelty, not forgiveness, just absence. I stood, gathered my notebook, my pen, my dignity still intact, still mine. One of the board members, a woman I'd known for years but never once seen without a name tag, asked gently, "Margaret, are you staying on?" The room waited. Even Greg looked up like maybe, just maybe, I'd swoop in to save them from the mess they made. I smiled small and sharp. "No," I said, "but I'll leave my terms in writing." And I walked out. Not fast, not slow, not victorious in the Hollywood way, just finished. By the time I reached the elevator, the building already felt different. The walls taller, the ceilings quieter. The fall hadn't been mine, it never had been. And as I stepped inside and pressed the button to the lobby, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit them.